Having looked at mitosis, which is the dividing of the nucleus to produce two identical nuclei, we now turn to meiosis, the dividing of nuclei of one nucleus to produce a very different kind of cell. Meiosis really involves going through, sort of like going through mitosis twice. The stages of meiosis are divided into meiosis 1, which is going to look very much like mitosis, and then each of the resulting cells will undergo meiosis 2, which looks again very much like mitosis. So let's take a look at what's going on here. First of all, we name these, the phases of meiosis very similarly to how we name the phases of mitosis. We begin with a prophase, except that if we only said prophase, that would suggest that it's mitosis. We say prophase 1, that indicates that we're in the process of meiosis 1, and we're going to have a prophase 2, that will indicate we're in meiosis 2. So you can distinguish whether a phase is in mitosis, meiosis 1, or meiosis 2 by whether it's got just simply the name of the stage, that would be mitosis, or if it's got the name of the stage plus a 1, that would mean meiosis 1. If it's got a name of the stage plus a 2, that would be meiosis 2. Prophase 1 is very, very similar to prophase in mitosis. Our DNA condenses, so it's going to be made into that skein form, that hot dog shaped form, and thus it appears under the microscope for the first time. Centrioles appear on each end of the cell. They're going to be the place to which all the cell components are going to be pulled. The nucleus, the nuclear membrane disappears. The nucleoli disappear. There's one thing that's different about meiosis 1, and prophase 1 in particular, than what we find in mitosis, and that is that homologous chromosomes pair with each other. Need to explain this a little bit. With sexual organisms, those organisms that actually do produce sex cells, the sperm and the eggs that must come together to produce fertilization, these organisms are made of chromosomes that are paired. For every chromosome with characteristics of the organism coded on it, there's another chromosome that looks very much like it. Same length. It's even got the same segments of the DNA to code for the same proteins as the first chromosome. This second chromosome is called a homologous chromosome. It's very similar. It's a homologue to the first one. It's got the same genes, but the genes can actually be expressed in a different way. Let's say you had a gene for eye color. On one chromosome, the gene for eye color might code for brown. On the other, it might code for blue. But they both have the same gene for, in this case, eye color. Homologous chromosomes are found in sexual organisms, whether you're talking about rabbits or pine trees or humans or basically everything but bacteria have homologous chromosomes. So they will have an even number of chromosomes. Rather than having just one chromosome, they'll have two. For every chromosome, they have a homologue. So there might be 6 chromosomes or 16 chromosomes. Humans have 46 chromosomes. We have 23 pairs of homologous chromosomes. In this prophase 1, the homologous chromosomes join together at that place that the individual sister chromatids on one chromosome are connected, the centromere. The centromere of one chromosome connects to the centromere of the homologous chromosome. So it'll kind of look like there's a total of 4 arms, actually 8 arms that come out from that central point, that centromere. And at this point, the arms of adjacent chromosomes can actually cross over each other. So an arm from one chromosome can cross over the other and trade genetic information. You can take a piece of one chromosome and a piece of the other chromosome and flip it from one to the other. Now, it always occurs at let's say it occurs 18 units from the end of this one. It's going to end up occurring at 18 units from the end of the other one. The two switch places, so you don't move genes around. You just switch the possible traits that you have on those particular genes. So it's during prophase 1 that you'll cross over, move genetic material around. We'll have a lab here that tries to explain this to you, hopefully with pop beads and so on. You can learn what it means for crossing over to occur. The result is that you cross over the arms and move genetic material around in a unique way. So the resultant cells have a genetic combination that is not found in either the father or the mother and is unique in the history of life. You move from prophase 1 to metaphase 1. All of these homologous chromosome pairs line up along the axis, the equator of the cell. Spindle fibers from the centrioles move down to connect with the homologous chromosome pairs. In anaphase 1, the chromosomes are separated. In this case, the homologous chromosomes are separated into opposite ends of the cell. In telophase 1, then we have come to the point where we can get rid of our centrioles. Now, usually in mitosis, at this point, we would create nuclear membranes around each of these. But we're not going to do that here because we've still got to do some more work here. We've still got to move things around. So we're going to keep the DNA condensed. We're going to not allow nuclear membranes to form at this point. We're going to continue on to meiosis 2. But at this point, we have reduced the number of chromosomes from, let's say if we're talking about humans, from 46 to 23. Because we've taken homologous chromosomes and paired them and then separated, putting the homologous chromosomes on opposite ends of the cell and separating them into two separate cells. So now each of these cells has half the number of chromosomes of the original cell. We move into meiosis 2. Prophase 2 is very simple. We don't have to condense our DNA because it's already there. We don't have to dissolve our nuclear envelope because we didn't have it there at the end of this. We don't have to dissolve our nucleoli either. All we have to do is produce centrioles on opposite ends of the cell for things to move towards. In metaphase 2, the chromosomes again line up at the center of the cell, spindle fibers attached to them. Anaphase 2, the sister chromatids are separated, just like in mitosis. In telophase 2, very similar to telophase in meiosis, the DNA now uncondenses, and it disappears then under a microscope. Centrioles disappear, they're no longer needed. The nuclear membrane appears around each end of the cell. Nucleoli begin appearing, and we're in a position now where the cell can grow to become its full size. So looking at this, comparing these two processes, mitosis and meiosis, mitosis starts with a certain number of chromosomes. Let's say in this diagram it starts with 4 chromosomes. At the end of the process, there are 2 cells, each with 4 chromosomes. In fact, you end up with cells that have the exact same components as each other, and they have the exact same DNA as the original cell. Mitosis duplicates your cell completely. So again, it's used for replacing cells that have died. It's used for growing. This is when you want to produce identical cells. 1 cell becomes 2, and the DNA is exactly identical to the original DNA. Meiosis, in contrast, we're starting in this diagram with a cell that's got 4 chromosomes, just like this one, but we end up with not 2 cells, but 4. Because we divide once in meiosis 1, and then we go through meiosis 2 and divide again, so we end up with 4 cells. So mitosis goes from 1 to 2, meiosis from 1 to 4, and the number of chromosomes divides in half, because at the first, in meiosis 1, you end up separating your homologous chromosomes. Only half the chromosomes end up in one cell, the other half in the other cell. So we end up with half the genetic material in each of these cells. Mitosis, same genetic material in the parents and the daughter cells. In meiosis, only half the genetic material is in each cell. Also, another difference is there's crossing over that occurs here early on in prophase 1. As a consequence of that, there's a combination of genetic material in each of these resultant cells that is different from the parent cell we started with. So contrasting mitosis and meiosis. Mitosis goes from 1 cell to 2, meiosis from 1 cell to 4. Mitosis starts with a certain amount of DNA, and the exact same amount of DNA and the exact arrangement of DNA is in each of the 2 cells. In meiosis, we end up with half the amount of DNA in each resultant cell and in a unique combination. So the 2 result in a very different kind of end product. In the case of meiosis, these 4 cells are either 4 egg cells or they're 4 sperm cells. And in the process of reproduction, if a sperm cell from one individual swims over and fertilizes the egg cell from another individual, you realize the sperm cell is carrying half the genetic material of the original cell. The egg cell is containing half the genetic material. When you dump the sperm DNA into the egg, you have half plus a half. You now have all the genetic material to make the final adult. That's how sexual reproduction actually works. So again, mitosis is used for repair and growth. Meiosis is for sexual reproduction to produce sperm and eggs for that purpose. In the process of studying mitosis and meiosis, we have learned how cells can reproduce and ultimately how organisms can reproduce their physical bodies. But what about non-physical reproduction? After all, humans are not just their physical body, they are also the non-physical aspect, the spirit and the soul. Animals are not just their physical body, there's also what the Bible calls a soul with an animal. So how are the life and soul and spirit passed on from one generation to the another? And remember, life itself is non-physical, as we've postulated earlier in the course. Well, the simple answer to the question is we simply don't know. We don't know how the spirit is actually passed on to the next generation. Is it that the spirit of mom and the spirit of dad combine and produce a baby spirit that goes into the baby? Or does the life of the mom connect with the life of the dad and produce a baby life that goes into the baby? We don't know for sure, although we suspect that what I just described is not what's going on. The simple answer to what happens here, we don't know, because the non-physical we can't observe. The Bible doesn't give us a lot of information, and so we have to kind of infer this from some observations from both the physical world and the Bible. Our observation might include what we observe in vitro fertilization. In vitro fertilization is a process whereby you can take the sperm from a man and the eggs from a woman and take them out of them in each case, take them into the laboratory, mix them together, you can get fertilization to occur, and you can then take the fertilized egg, implant it into the mother, and the mother can give birth to a baby. So that baby seems to have a spirit, a soul, life, and all of that stuff. So apparently you don't need, since in vitro fertilization actually occurs, we've done it a lot, it's clear that a spirit can be generated, a soul can be generated, life can be transmitted without the mom and dad being in any physical contact. You can actually take the sperm and egg separate from them and combine them outside of their respective bodies without them coming in contact at all. In fact, they could both be dead, actually, and we could continue this process. The fertilization could occur while they're both dead. They have no life. They have no. So what this suggests is that whatever is the process of non-physical reproduction, parental contact with each other is not necessary. A second observation is that in those situations of identical twins, here we have a single fertilization event. An egg is fertilized by a sperm, and then the fertilized egg divides, producing two cells. And if those cells are separated, each of these cells can produce a separate human being, an identical twin. We've observed identical twins. There have been a bunch of them down through time. Identical twins each have life. They each have spirit. They each have soul. But they started from one fertilization event. So the fertilization event itself is not the origin of the soul and life. You seem to have to add life and soul even later than fertilization, at least in that particular instance. So fertilization doesn't seem to be the critical event for the passing on of non-physical entities. The bottom line is that our best guess, and we get this information largely from theologians who've worked on this as well, our best guess is that God actually directly creates the non-physical. There is a sense in which we do not think that the physical world can generate non-physical things. We don't think that bodies can generate life. We don't think that bodies can generate soul. We don't think that bodies can generate spirits. We think that it's really only possible for God to create life, for God to form new spirit, for God to form new soul. And so we suspect that it is God Himself who creates the non-physical portion of humans and animals, which is consistent with what the Bible tells us. It says in Isaiah 44:2, "The Lord has made you, formed you from the womb." Psalm 104:2 and 24, speaking about the animals of the land, both small and great beasts, you, God, sends forth your spirit and they are created. As if God is active in this world, all across this world, creating the souls of animals. So if you got a rabbit somewhere producing a bunch of baby rabbits, you got worm producing baby worms, that in fact God is putting the soul into those individuals. He's creating those things Himself directly. But then another question is, when does He do that? At what point? Does He do that at fertilization? Does He do that after fertilization? Does He do that? When does He create those non-physical things? Psalm 51, David says, "In sin did my mother conceive me." Now we have reason to believe that David's mother was not sinning while she was conceiving David. That's not what this means. What this seems to mean is that David was a sinner from the moment of conception, which means that he existed, his non-physical aspect of himself existed at conception. And he was already prone to sin. He was already a sinner at this point. So that would suggest that God created David's non-physical nature at least as far back as conception. And we suspect that it's actually at conception, or very close thereto, that God chooses to create the non-physical aspect of organisms. And again, that's consistent with what the Bible says about this in several places. Psalm 139:13, "You, God, covered me," David is speaking, You, God, covered me in my mother's womb. In Luke 1:41, we have the encounter between Elizabeth and Mary. Mary, the mother of Jesus, she is carrying Jesus in her womb. Jesus is very early in development. Mary's cousin, Elizabeth, is carrying John the Baptist. He's 6 months older. He's 6 months old in the womb. When Elizabeth and Mary encounter each other, John the Baptist, in the womb of Elizabeth, jumps or turns over, makes himself known. He's responding to Jesus in the womb of Mary, which is consistent with the idea that both John the Baptist at 6 months into the pregnancy and Jesus very soon in the pregnancy each have spirits that are interacting with each other. In Exodus 21, verses 22 through 25, there's this extraordinary set of verses that are describing what happens or what is the appropriate response whenever two men are fighting and they happen to injure a woman who is pregnant. So the situation is two men are fighting with each other and they didn't intend on hurting this woman, but they injure a woman who is pregnant with child. The verses talk about three possible outcomes here. It could be that they injure the woman, but it doesn't seem to do any, or they hit the woman, but it doesn't really do any injury to her. It doesn't seem to injure the child. It doesn't cause the child to be prematurely born or anything. There doesn't seem to be any damage done. In that first instance, then, the husband of the woman who is pregnant will define what kind of fine these two men should pay for this situation. The second situation is that if the men in injuring the woman cause the woman to actually give birth to her child, if in that process the woman seems to come out all right without any injury, and the child seems to be okay through the birth, in that particular case, even though it was a premature delivery of a child, if everything seems to be fine, again, the husband defines the fine that these two men must pay. The third situation is the interesting one. That's when they have injured the woman, causes her to give birth, but something's wrong. The mother or the child are in fact injured in the process. And there's damage done one way or the other. And then there's this famous quote that says that how these men are to be punished is as per the following: a burning for burning. In other words, if there's evidence of scarring on the child, then the men are to be scarred. There's an eye for an eye. If the child is blind or the woman is blinded in the process, then they are to be blinded in response. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, a burning for a burning, a life for a life. If the result of this fight was the death of the child or the mother, then these men are to be killed in response. This is really an extraordinary passage because it makes adult male men equivalent to a child in the womb. Doesn't say how far along in the pregnancy it is. It could be just days into the pregnancy. It could be 8 months into the pregnancy. It doesn't matter whether the child in the womb is a male or a female. It's going to make the adult human male part for part equivalent to the child in the womb. The child in the womb has the full image of God. It has the full spirit. It has the full soul. It is fully human, equivalent to an adult male outside the womb. So in this passage, and since it doesn't specify where in the pregnancy it is, that means that even a brand new, recently fertilized egg is fully human, consistent with the idea that God created the non-physical at the moment of conception. This also means that it's very possible, since the soul is created at such early stage in development, the soul might actually contribute to the development of the animal or the human in the womb, which is very interesting. These things we can't know for sure, but it sure looks as if God creates the non-physical early in development at or near conception, and that He's responsible for the growth and development of the individual from there on out.